This is another iRaw podcast. We podcast to make the world a better place for animals.
Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals. Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan does like knowing animals.
Hey people, it's Siobhan here. I am dropping in to bring you this really special and a bit unusual mini episode of Knowing Animals. Now, as you know, in 2010, the podcast has gone to a fortnightly format, so you're probably not expecting this extra special episode this week. But something really exciting is happening that I want to draw your attention to, so I thought I'd jump in with this special episode, and I'm joined by two of my favourite animal studies people, Fiona Probyn-Rapsey.
Hi.
And Yvette Watt.
Hello.
And I don't normally have two guests on, but I've got very, very wonderful technical assistance from my friend Brian, who set up all of these wonderful microphones and has brought Skyped Yvette in from Tasmania. Now, the reason I brought these two wonderful people together is to talk about our animal studies survey, which is being run now in 2020, our second version of the survey. So, Yvette, I'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about the first version of the survey that was run in 2015?
Sure can. I remember really clearly us coming up with the idea at a Minding Animals conference some years back and realising that we only had a very slim understanding of what the field was, how people came to the field of animal studies, and where they saw the challenges and rewards of working in the field. And so our survey was designed to try and get a picture of all of those things. And so I remember when we were first sitting down to put the questions together, how exciting it was to think through the sort of data that we were going to get from that. And I think it was a great thing to do. I'm really excited to be doing it a second time.
Yeah, so we ran it 5 years ago and we got about 500 responses. So, Fiona, can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that that stand out for you that we saw in that first batch of data?
Yeah, when I think initially we were interested in trying to see how different disciplines were contributing to animal studies as it was emerging. And what was interesting in that first set of data was how dominant literature was as a field in how many scholars were identifying as literary scholars. Philosophy also had quite a big presence in that survey. But really, I suppose when we started to look at the data, a number of other themes came out, and that was partly some of our use of that 2015 data related to patterns that we weren't necessarily expecting. So, for instance, gender became quite a significant feature of the way in which people were navigating the field and participating in the field. And the question of veganism was also quite prominent in the data, and some of that was led by not so much the questions as opposed to the answers in the open-ended question comments boxes where people provided really passionate and interesting and engaged responses to some of these broader questions and challenges that face the field. So like any good social science research, we were led by the data and not
wonderful.
by our expectations.
So we had 3 publications that came out from that first survey, which, as we said, was done 5 years ago. One of them was called Tainted Love, and that appeared in the journal Animals and Society, and that had a look at why people would undertake animal studies even if it is perceived to be a bit of a risk to a career. Perhaps it means that you are a little bit ridiculed or perhaps feel insecure in terms of getting funding. And in that article, we argued that it is challenging undertaking a career in animal studies, but there could be benefits, and those benefits might have to do with developing kind of a resistance and a residual nature that might help you in a kind of a neoliberal higher education setting. Yvette, can you tell us a little bit about the paper we did on veganism and food choices among animal studies scholars?
Yeah, absolutely. So that paper was called Should We Eat Our Research Subjects, which was a slightly cheeky and provocative title, but I think quite fitting given the content of the paper and the data that it was looking at from the survey. And what I think, what was really interesting was to look at what were the sorts of things that were bringing people to animal studies. Did people come from an activist background? Did they see animal advocacy as being an important part of what we do as animal studies scholars? And did their background and their dietary choices in any way impact upon the sorts of scholarship that they saw animal studies being involved in, and how much should it be advocating in an active way for animals? And in the end, what we found was that, yes, that did make a difference, that people who came from an activist background, and particularly those, when we started to apply a filter around whether people chose to exclude animal products from their diet or not, presumably for ethical reasons, did impact on how strongly they ascribe to the idea that animal studies scholars should be there working to advocate on behalf of animals.
Wonderful. And Fiona, what about the gender? You've already mentioned gender. What did you see? What did we find in terms of gender in the first survey?
So in the article that we published, which is called Pussy Panic, with what's the subtitle? I've forgotten.
I think it was Glass Elevators.
And how gender is shaping the field of animal studies. That's right. And Pussy Panic, of course, is the phrase that belongs to Susan Freeman, the American literary scholar. And in that article, so that article came out last year in Australian Feminist Studies, and what we were looking at there was this strange phenomena whereby it appeared that women in the survey were not publishing as much as men were reporting on their publishing in the survey. And so we looked at some of the significance of that in relation to women's participation as keynotes at conferences, for instance, and the presence of women in anthologies, and the downloading rates from your podcast, Siobhan, to sort of see what was going on for women in the field. And we had to look outside the survey for a lot of that research, and to sort of to have a look at the higher education system and how that was also a very uneven playing field when it comes to women academics. So that's going to be really useful, I think, to look at that 5 years down the track. This new survey, and hopefully we'll see some of those positive changes which were emerging around 2018, for instance. We see some women taking up a greater role in relation to animal studies. And of course, this is not just about animal studies. This is this lack of equality in the playing field actually does affect a number of fields in higher education. So we'll see, we'll hopefully see some positive changes there.
Yeah, so we're running the survey for the second time, 5 years after we ran it the first time. My hope is that we have at least twice the sample size as we had in 2015.
Thousands.
This is a growing field. I really, really want people to fill out the survey so we can see what's happening, so we can track the development of this field or this subfield, and so we can bring more insights to people who are both actively involved in animal studies and people working in other parts of the academy. Now, the link to the survey is available in the show notes. You can also find it pinned to the top of the Knowing Animals podcast Facebook page, and you can also find it in a range of other locations, such as the Australasian Animal Studies Association's Facebook page. And if you get lost at all, if you want to fill it out and you can't find the link, you can always email me. Yvette, do you have a closing thought to people who are weighing up whether to fill out the survey or not?
Oh, well, I just think you'd be crazy not to. I mean, you can have your say in this really important and growing field, and the only way we can get a true picture of the diversity of the field is to get as many people involved as possible filling out our survey.
Okay, and Fiona, do you have a closing thought for people who are trying to decide whether this is a good way to invest 10 to 15 minutes of their time?
Yes, just do it.
Just do it?
12 minutes, you won't regret it. And every time you hear us banging on about it, you'll know that you actually contributed to the data.
It is open for 6 weeks. At the time of hearing this, you probably have about 3 weeks available to you to fill it out. So don't delay, get going. What a tragedy if you click on one day to have your say of what's happening in the field of animal studies and find that the survey is closed. You'll never forgive yourself. Well,
Never.
That's all for now. I'm Dr. Siobhan O'Sullivan. I do like knowing animals, and I can't wait to bring you some insights from the 2020 survey of animal studies scholars. See ya! For more great iRaw podcasts, visit irawpod.com. That's IROARPOD.com.